So we're recording. Well, thank you very much for joining us, whoever is watching this. I'm Sean Tubbs, the host of whatever this program is. I'm the president of Town Crier Productions, an organization that seeks to bring you as much information as possible about Charlottesville, which is in Virginia. And this is a story and an interview today about something that has touched Virginia before. But it's part of the 34th Virginia Film Festival, which begins today and resumes back in person 1 year after the pandemic. Of course, health has been something on all of our minds. And one of the films, several of the films are about issues. Obviously, there's Dope Sick, which is premiering, the Beth Macy inspired Hulu series about the opioid crisis all across the country. That one takes place in Southwest Virginia. There's also something called the Remote Area Medical Corps, the RAM clinics, which have, over the course of period of time, shown up in Southwest Virginia. But what is the remote area? What is the Remote Area Medical Corps? Well, there's a film that screens this Sunday, Halloween, at the film festival at 1:30 called Medicine Man, the Stan Brock Story. It's a documentary about one person's attempt to create a system of healthcare for remote areas across the world. But before we talk about the work of Stan Brock, I'm here with Paul Michael Angell, the director of the film Medicine Man, a Stan Brock story. Paul, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a Scottish-born British filmmaker based in London. I was once an English teacher on an island in the Indian Ocean, but finally found my calling in the world of documentary film, where I've been working for about 14 years. And we started making this film in April 2012, and 9 years later, it's finally hitting screens in the United States. So this feels pretty sweet, having waited so long.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about your team in a few minutes, because obviously this film is screening. This is your Virginia premiere of the film this Sunday on Halloween. But first of all, can you tell us a little bit about Stan Brock? He has a very interesting story, very, very wild youth, and he became a person of the wild. And then, of course, now he spent the latter half of his life, I suppose, working to bring healthcare to the wild. Can you tell us just a little bit about who he was and how you and your team wanted to make a film of him?
Stan Brock is a kind of misfit boarding school boy from Britain who fled life in his boarding school, got on a boat to Guyana, turned up, asked to become a cowboy, taught himself to become a cowboy, ended up running one of the world's largest cattle ranches. He was then discovered by some US TV producers on holiday who saw him and the way he was, and he was like herding cattle barefoot and riding horses barefoot. And they thought, this guy is absolutely perfect for TV in the US. So they took him to America and they put him in the world's first wildlife TV series, which was called Wild Kingdom. Ran throughout the 60s and 70s on NBC, I believe, and others. And it was a big part of a lot of people's Sunday nights, from what I can gather. Like I bump into people all across America who tell me, I remember that show. Yeah, you had Marlon Perkins, you had Stan Brock, the animal wrangler. If it was dangerous, it was like Stan got sent to do it. If it was safe, Marlon was standing there presenting, looking suave. But despite this relative fame, Stan had something of an epiphany. You could call it a midlife crisis. And he realized there was a lot more to life, and he wanted to do something that had some lasting effect, but he didn't really have much resources. So what he did was he sold all of his worldly goods, all of his possessions, the land he owned, the house he owned, everything, and plowed it into creating Remote Area Medical. 25 years later, Remote Area Medical is the largest free deliverer of healthcare in the United States. It's helped over 1 million people. It's run over 1,000 clinics across the US. It's a huge, huge organization, and it all comes from the commitment of one guy, a British guy, and that's the connection with me, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And you're filmmakers, and that's quite the commitment to spend 8 years, or approximately 7.5 years or so, however long it took to make this. How did his story come across your desk, or the threshold, or the transom, or however you filmmakers make things? How did you
Well,
get up the idea?
well, 8 years ago, before I had grey hair, I mean, that's how long this film's taken. My research skills go no further than just simply checking the national newspapers. Mm-hmm. And I discovered this incredible article about Stan Brock, and it covered all this really rich backstory about England, ranches, cowboys, wildlife TV stardom. And then it said that he's running these really important health clinics in the US that are like the last line of defense, the last resort for people who just cannot access the system because it's so expensive, or because they live in remote areas. Mm-hmm. So I could see straight away that this is the makings of a feature-length documentary. You've got this very important social issue, but you've also have this incredibly rich character who you can just keep like digging into and finding more interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'm just gonna Google this organization and call them up and express an interest. And it's a Sunday evening, and I call the office, and I'm not really expecting anybody to answer because it's a Sunday. And lo and behold, Stan Brock himself answers the phone. And he's like, "Good afternoon, remote area medical, Stan Brock speaking. How can I help you?" Huh. And I think, wow, he doesn't just talk the talk. He walks the walk. This guy is for real. He's obviously a complete workaholic. Mm-hmm. I want this film like more than ever. So I say that I've just read the article. I'm inspired by it. It's exciting just to be talking to him like seconds after putting the newspaper down. Would he consider doing a film? He said he would consider it, but he'd actually been approached by quite a few filmmakers. He'd been on CBS by this point. So he was fairly known by the national news media. He assessed his options. He called us up and he said, "I'd love you to go ahead and make this film." Now, to this day, I'm not really sure why he chose us. There were other filmmakers who were much more celebrated and much more experienced than we were, but he chose us, and to this day, we're honored by that choice. Maybe he saw some parallels between the way we were working in a very kind of small DIY nature and the way in which he'd begun remote area medical at the very beginning, which was very much the kind of pioneer spirit. Hey, just get some dental chairs and get some donated drugs and get any medical practitioners we can find, and let's just get up there into those hills around Tennessee, around Knoxville, and do one of these clinics,
So is that where he was based first? He was based in Knoxville, Tennessee?
Yeah. He has always been based in Knoxville, Tennessee. And initially, the organization started doing clinics around East Tennessee, Virginia, Kentucky, Georgia. But over the 25 years that they've been operating, they've now spread to East Coast, West Coast. They're a truly nationwide organization.
Now, perhaps, so there is the British connection. So he was born in somewhere in England, I presume, and he wound up in the United States, but he chose a British filmmaking crew. Do you think that was maybe part of it? And also, why would a British film crew be interested in healthcare in the United States?
I think for Stan's part, and it's always hard to speak for the people that are in your films. My job is creating a space where they can speak for themselves. But I think for Stan's part, he was at a time in life, in his 70s, where he perhaps wanted to reconnect with that British history, his British past. Maybe that was what part of his motivation. In 2014, he came to the United Kingdom and gave a speech at the Royal Society of Medicine, and was discussing potentially the idea of running a remote area medical clinic in the United Kingdom, interestingly, which never came to fruition. There's lots of like legal and sort of regulatory problems with doing that, but it didn't quite happen. So I think there might have been some of that. I mean, like I said, you know, the same ethos with British. I think I would never flatter myself to say that I was his kindred spirit, but I think he did see something, because we, like I said, we weren't a big outfit. He kind of took a chance on us.
And I have a small picture of him here. Now, this gives us the opportunity to talk a little bit about the film too. Now, you have already premiered it in the United States, but we're looking at, there's a thing here that says that you were actually, my eyes are going, so I can't actually read the small print here, but you got honored at the San Luis Obispo Film Festival. What does that say down there?
Best documentary feature?
That's it. Gotcha. Sorry, I need eyes.
Yeah.
No, I need the clinic.
Well, there are ones happening in Virginia later this year at Grundy and Harrisonburg. Have I got that right?
Perhaps, and I'll be happy to look into that for the future for this. But but just to, oh gosh, I hit the wrong button again.
Still with it.
But I think with this though, I think that's it. So how does one though get to the point where you go from the idea to the subject matter, introducing yourself to the subject matter? When did you start filming him?
The first time we went to film Stan was in April 2012. And, the process of developing an idea from the initial concept to beginning filming is a ton of research, a ton of like good old human communication and talking to people and getting a feel for them, not necessarily getting every detail of their story actually, but getting a sense of like the rhythm of their daily life, or the way that they communicate with people, or who they might call their family, or their what's that word people use, like friends who are family, like what do they define as their closest kind of confidants. And then, I mean, before you go, you always try to conceive of the methods and techniques that you'd use. I was a bit of a naive film school purist who wanted to do the purely observational work, with me just melting into the background and you having this wonderful objective window on Stan Brock's world. But when I met Stan, I realized that wasn't going to be possible, that it probably wasn't fair to ask a man to tell these incredibly deep and impactful stories just like on the hoof, while he's washing dishes to me, like telling me about how he tamed his first horse, or how he saw a man die in his arms, when they were in Guyana, and the guy got sick when they were driving cattle across the savannas. Stuff that, really makes an impression on people. So then I thought, okay, we need to stand down in a chair and really, this is 80 years of a man's life. There's a lot to get through. So we started to use formal interviews, and then you discover, oh, Stan didn't just run this ranch. He was actually a big part of a TV show. And you realize, okay, there's all this archive out there. So you think, well, we'll use the archive. And then that grows into stills, photographs. And I even wanted to use animation, but, the producer began to walk out at that point because, we didn't quite have the resources and the film had been going on for so long. Stan made his own audiobook, which is quite an interesting kind of texture, and we didn't use that either. So I think you've got all this. I didn't even mention you've got all this actuality stuff of what they're actually doing at remote area medical clinics every week. So you've got all these different things happening, and we decided, right, we're actually going to try and make this work, where you've got like present day footage, all the backstory, all the archive, the stills, drone shots, interviews with Stan, some slow-mo stuff. It's a stylistic mishmash, but I think I hope we kind of pulled it off, because we had some fantastic editors that made all these different elements flow. I'm sorry, you only asked me how we set this thing up, and I gave you a kind of complete answer on the process. But yeah, I hope that gives.
Oh no, that's absolutely fascinating. It's I think, I just, with a subject like this, that seeing an outsider's perspective, even though he's also British, about this. Obviously, you're also looking at a healthcare system, and of course, at a time when the National Health Service in England is also having its own existential crisis.
Indeed,
yeah. Is this a film about healthcare as much as it's a film about Stan Brock?
It's a film about learning to care, you could say. I feel that obviously that's Stan's journey, but I feel that in the time that I was in America, 2012 until 2020, you could see people becoming more aware of the lack of healthcare for their fellow citizens. People becoming more empathetic, and people beginning to dissociate the right for healthcare from any kind of political persuasion. And I hope that's where we are now in America, that the issue of healthcare can be seen as a human and a humanitarian issue first and foremost, not a political issue. Therefore, an issue that all sides of the political divide support and want to see change in and want to see an improvement in, even if that means reducing the role of the market. And I think that's the tough one. And if you watch the film, there is a couple who are treated, and they're very much kind of red state Republican people, and they embody the difficulty in trying to conceive of a new system, I think, where it's kind of like perhaps less of the market forces and more of the government involvement, be that state government or federal government, or but what I thought about Stan is he never got political. He really tried to rise above all that stuff. He's all about bringing people together, regardless of their political beliefs.
Well, in a way, he's he sees an issue, something that needs to be solved. And at the end of the day, the stories of the people who attend these clinics they're all over the place. There's even dental clinics, I believe, sometimes. And I think it exposes the need. And at the end of the day, people are either going to get helped or they're not. And I think that, I personally have not seen the film. I'm looking forward to attending. I'm going to see if I can get tickets this afternoon myself, but it is on Sunday. And is there any final things that you think people should know before they go in and see this film?
Yeah, it's not a film about trying to shove it down people's throats that there's a problem. I don't think films should ever feel like you're trying to feed vegetables to children. That's very patronizing. It is
no broccoli.
Makes you strong. It is. I think I've said before that it's a film about learning to care, but I think the film ultimately ends up being a celebration of what American people can do when they come together as a community and help out their fellow citizen. And that's the very thing, actually, that really captivated Stan about the United States in the first place. And that's why he stayed, and that's why he decided to start this in the United States, because it's perhaps one of the few places where people have got the necessary get up and go to make something like this happen.
Well, certainly seeing examples of this is something that I'm looking forward to. And I do think a lot of people will. And just wanted to thank you. Paul Michael Angell here he's the director of Medicine Man, the Stan Brock story. The 34th Virginia Film Festival runs October 27th through October 31st. October 31st is the day is the day that you will see this show. Is it where is next? Now, you unfortunately will not be coming to the film festival this year, but can you talk a little bit about because obviously, are there any scenes from this in Virginia?
Yeah, absolutely. So just let me say that the film will be screening at Violet Crown, Charlottesville, 200 West Main Street, Charlottesville. just so you know where the venue is.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There are 2 visits to Wise County, which is in the west of Virginia, I believe, southwest Virginia, in 2015 and 2018. And you can really get a sense of like what life is like for people up there in that mountainous area of Wise County. But remote area medical itself has been, all over Virginia. So hopefully people will recognize this story when they see it on screen.
Yes, and hopefully, and maybe it means the next time one of these comes around, some of my fellow journalists will tell some of the stories of the people there, and because again, it's a tremendous. It seems to be a very tremendous thing that's helped a lot of people, and now it's the subject of this documentary. So thank you for joining us today, and good luck to you in the future. And I'm Sean Tubbs, and thank you for watching this little bit from the Virginia Film Festival. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean.